So welcome back to Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. When I saw this woman's submission to be on the show, she used the word conflict and creativity in the same sentence. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have her on the show. So Kat Newport, welcome to the show, my fellow Canadian.
Thanks so much for having me, Debbie.
There's nothing like having another fellow Canadian on the show, eh? I know. That's how people know us, and that's okay. And you're in beautiful Alberta, which is stunning. I have friends and family there, and always a treat to fly west to your province. So I am delighted to have you on because conflict is your thing, and I can't think of a more heart-centered leadership conversation to have with the word conflict in any sentence, question, statement. So I'm going to ask you 4 leadership questions and then 4 fun questions. So my first question is just the easy one. So you believe that conflict equals creativity. So share with us a little bit about you and how you got down this rabbit hole and basically turned it into this beautiful garden of flowers. And I'm using a garden metaphor because your beautiful sweater. Share with us where this came to be and a little bit about Kat.
Hey, so it was a really long and winding road, to quote the Beatles. A very long and winding road. I started my career way back. I was 19 years old when I first stepped into corporate. And I gradually got up in the world. And it was one of the things I was never really taught how to do, how to manage conflict, how to manage, and to define what I'm talking about. When I talk about conflict, I'm talking about differences of opinion coming together in a moment. I'm not talking about international conflict. I'm not talking about all the other stuff that can come up. It's simply a difference of perspective in the moment. And it became so curious to me that how can I not know how to do it? It seems like such an innate thing that, okay, we can manage differences of opinion. It's good. And everybody seemed to have these different levels. And I worked for a good long time in quality assurance and quality control. And if you want conflict, try going into a workplace saying, you might not be doing this quite right. You might want to look at it slightly different. You want conflict, it's rife and ripe for it. So it became a bit of a passion as I moved on in my career, got into organizational development, and conflict was the number one hot topic that everybody wanted to learn about. And I was given the opportunity to teach leaders from all over the country on how to manage conflict in real time in a dynamic workplace under huge amounts of stress. And when I finally stepped out of that corporate role, I went, so what am I going to do with the next year? Because I'm going to take a bit of a hiatus. And I decided, okay, let's niche in. Let's write the book that we've always wanted to write and give it a go. And that is my very long and winding road.
That's wonderful. And you know what? I always find those long and winding roads have valleys, and those valleys have so much growth that lead us to the creativity that creates the opportunity, which is, I love it. That's why I wanted to have you on the show. Okay, my second question has permanent residency on the show. From season 1, guest 1, to now season 5 with you, over 300 leaders. What imperfections does Kat bring to her heart-centered leadership?
Perfections. I want to fix everything. I want to make it right. I have this overriding, deep-seated, gut-churning kind of, oh, you have a problem? I know the answer. I can do this. I don't know the answer. I will find you the answer. There's this desperate need to do that. And as I started to go up the rungs of corporate leadership, this was no longer viable anymore. This was, okay, so how do I make an opportunity for this individual to become independent? And how do they solve their own problem? And what does that look like for them? And if it doesn't look like what I would have done, is that okay? And welcome to conflict. That kind of thing. But it is still something today that I've got to shut your mouth and let's figure out what this is going to look like moving forward without, dun, 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 coming into the rescue.
Well, and I think so many people that have been on the show want to be fixers, and it comes from a place of love, but then we have to kind of renew our own life experiences and education and conflict. And being art-centered is inspiring others and setting them up for autonomy and being sustainable. And it's hard. I mean, I can throw my hat in the ring there too. It's you want to be a fixer and help and people please. And we all go through those valleys. So you're in good company here on the show. I have interviewed many of you, including myself as the host. Okay, so my third question, I would love for you to chat with me and share with our audience. We are in 65 countries, by the way, and we're super proud of that. What is the hardest concept that you've noticed or observed to reconcile with heart-centered leadership? Because that to me is the epitome of the question that is not only fitting for the show, but it's a daily for many leaders at all levels. And, I heard for over 30 years that heart-centered leadership didn't belong in business acumen. No one's ever put it in there, but I did. And I wrote the playbook on it. So share with us where you would even start with this and maybe some strategies to give our listeners a takeaway.
Question. So for me, it does come back to conflict. Conflict happens every single day when there's more than one person in the room, and sometimes even when there's only one. So the fact that we as organizations, we as leaders have varying degrees and wildly varying degrees of ability to manage this, which ties directly into your concept of emotions don't belong in the workplace. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that. I was working in a very male-dominated industry. I was the first female national director in the organization. It was, emotions don't belong here. You don't bring emotions in. You do. You're dealing with whole human beings. You're not just dealing with a robot sitting in a chair who doesn't feel. And I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with who, have those explosive anger moments. And as long as it's anger and as long as it's a fella, everything's fine. So really being able to tap into the knowledge that, okay, I'm in this moment. I'm not agreeing with what's going on. There's definitely something happening, and how to engage with that in a positive way. And a proactive way, because so many of us just kind of shy away from that, going, nope, don't want to deal with it. And we got to turn around and run the other way. So being able to be brave enough to step into the arena, be brave enough to step into the arena with a positive outlook on conflict. Conflict is not a dirty word. And be able to take the opinions of the other individuals, the perspectives of the other individuals, and use that to help you get out of the box. I mean, we hear this all the time. Think outside the box, think outside the box. But if you're only looking at your own perspective, how far outside of the box can you actually get?
That's a great point.
Contrast. It takes that comparison. So I think that really resonated with me. And I think that's one of the reasons, again, why I kind of chased after this conflict idea as a niche, as a passion project.
And I think my last question, it's kind of a two-parter. If you think about conflict and how it derives, and there's a lot of personal emotions, and I don't know what it's like in your world, I find a lot of it has nothing to do with the leader or their role or responsibility. It's those lovely remnants that we bring into work from home. And I'm wondering, because I talk a lot about life shows up at work and work shows up at life. And sometimes we can't control those boundaries because we are human emotional beings. Could you share with us maybe a scenario or a case study that's kind of hung on your heart that maybe was deep and wide, or even something simplistic without obviously breaching confidentiality, where you felt not only proud, but honored to be part of the conflict resolution?
I'll pull one from my book, and it's in there. And there was this individual that I had been working with for quite some time. I was an account manager, and I was dealing with human services, so providing services to a client. And this individual had a heart of gold, the best of intentions everywhere. unfortunately, there was just never a fit. It was just never quite understanding what the service needed to be. And it was, the coaching and the evolution. And I know you can do it. Let's try it over here. I know you can do it. Let's try it over there. And eventually it came to a point where the contract had to be severed. We had to finally sit down and say, we did a good job. We gave it the best shot. We tried really, really hard. And I remember dreading this. I remember staying up the night before with that gut churning, I'm doing a termination tomorrow. This is, I really don't want to do this one. There are some you go in and it's like, whatever. But I really didn't want to do this one. And she called me about 15 minutes before saying, can I bring someone with me? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Bring a union rep, bring whomever, and she came in with her mom. And we sat down and we had the conversation, and that conflict went so much better because there was that support person. And I think mom was as much as a support for me as it was for the employee. It was just this flow, and there was the gratitude, and it's stuck with me. And we're going back easily 15, 20 years. But it's stuck with me for decades. Just knowing that we tried, the conflict remained. We tried again, the conflict remained. And finally, the conflict had to come to a less than ideal emotional summation. Best for the organization, I think best for her as well. But we really worked through that conflict in an empathetic way, taking care of the people involved. And I think that made a huge difference.
Well, and it's the simplest sentence that we can deliver hard news or have that hard conversation in a heart-centered way. And there's a prime example. But the interesting thing for me is the proudness that you have for navigating it. And here you are a decade and a half ahead in life, and it still has remnants on your heart. And that to me is when you've leaned in, you've been heart-centered, you remember those moments, and they're not easily forgotten because it was a hard thing, but you did it in a nice way. And how lovely from a psychological safe place that she wanted to bring her mom. Right? Everybody needs their mom. That's beautiful. Okay, I'm going to switch to my Fab Four. These are just 4 fun questions so our listeners can get to know you out of your professional role, but there's remnants that will be within the questions. So, first question, what's one practical tip you could give to our listeners to embrace heart-centered leadership in their daily lives?
Self-reflection. Know what you're bringing into the moment before you open your mouth. Oh, what I had to learn the hard way.
Right? Yeah. I mean, silence and observation are really underrated in leadership. They really are. That's a great answer. Okay. Second question. If your leadership style had a theme song, what would it be?
One that popped right into my head, like it was immediate, was Black Sheep by Jen Wigmore.
Yeah, everybody has to you have to tell us the connection now, because we're going to hear songs this season that nobody knows, and I don't know that song.
It's just about making your own road, right? Not towing the line, not, once you become that black sheep that kind of wanders off into the pasture, you never really go back.
Yeah.
And I think it's perfect. I mean, I'm kooky, I'm wonky. I have a different perspective on things. I want that connection. I want that relationship. And coming out of quality assurance, which can sometimes be very structured, very boxy, yes. It just didn't jive. So, Black Sheep, Jen Wigmore, I think is the first one.
And it's kind of like you said before, when we go off from the pack that everyone else is doing, that is true self-reflection. And sometimes you have to go against the current for your own success. And, that's a whole other show, but the long and winding road, right? Just even your own journey and what you explained. And I think that it's such a cliche when we go off on our own to figure it out, and it can be lonely, but the introspection is what's priceless, right? I love that. Okay, my last or my third. If you could summarize one key takeaway or lesson from our discussion today on conflict and creativity, what nugget do you really want to leave with our listeners today? Something that you want them to remember and maybe implement into their life and their leadership.
Reframe how you think about conflict. Conflict is not a dirty word. Reframe how you think about it to change how you deal with it.
Well, and when you say that, it makes me think of honoring and promoting discussion. And there's nothing better than a team meeting when a great debate comes out of innovation and creativity and progression. And I always love my introverts because they're sitting there not really participating, yet they're planning like the next 12 to 18 months, or they've already got the whole project done. And I love taking them aside and go, okay, I was watching you. And I'm like, do you pretty much have an idea, visionary, where we should go? And they're like, yeah, it's all done in my head. And they get so undervalued in some companies. So they're always my favorite. But there's nothing better than a reframe for something that society puts such a negative connotation on. That's amazing. I love that. Okay, I'm going to have you finish the show by finishing this sentence. Heart-centered leadership is
Wave of the future.